Good evening. NHS Tayside says it's taken some of the allegations in last night's BBC investigation into a Dundee mental health unit to Police Scotland. The documentary about the Carsview Centre revealed patients' claims of abuse, bullying and of illegal drug use. Since then, more people have come forward. Fiona Walker reports.
That was the last time when they were totally ignoring me, not offering, and I ended up really distressed with it.
Daisy and her mum look through photos taken during her stays in Carsview. She was only 17 when she was first admitted. She had anorexia, was suicidal and self-harming.
I'd say it nearly killed me. I'm surprised I got through it, and I still feel really traumatised from it, to the point that I don't really trust mental health professionals very much.
Daisy claims she was put in isolation when she was just 18 after making a complaint that a nurse hit her during a restraint.
So I was in total isolation at this time where I needed a lot of support, had no staff, no patients to speak to.
Daisy and her mum are just some of those who saw the documentary last night and wanted to speak out too.
She was not safe, and I don't even just think that, I know that. I know she wasn't safe because of the things that happened, but she was on a section and I couldn't help her. She was only a child. It was absolutely unbelievable. She was not safe on the section.
Daisy is just one of the former patients who saw the documentary last night and wanted their story to be heard. The allegations about Carsview range from pinning people to the ground in a way that experts describe as dangerous, bullying and lack of compassion. Today there are demands for action.
I'm calling today on the Cabinet Secretary for Health to put NHS Tayside mental health services into crisis measures, because this is about public confidence, and people in Dundee and Tayside need to know that their loved ones are being properly cared for. And what we have seen on the documentary, Falls, people are being failed.
The Scottish Government says they have been clear that NHS Tayside must swiftly investigate any allegations of mistreatment or breaches of patients' rights. The new chairman of the Health Board has spoken for the first time, saying he is taking action immediately.
We have set in train a couple of pieces of work to try and get a better handle on some of the issues that were raised by the programme. So an example of that is I was concerned, obviously, about restraint.
NHS Tayside have known about some of these allegations for at least 5 years. Why should people trust you to act now?
We have recognised that to some extent we have lost the trust, the confidence of the Tayside public, and that's why I decided to go down the route of an independent inquiry into mental health services.
And the board say the concerns about drugs and leadership are also being addressed.
Well, let's go to Fiona now, who's at Ninewells Hospital in Dundee, where the Carsview unit is based. And Fiona, a strong reaction to your revelations last night.
Yes, both politically and from the Health Board, as you heard there, who admit there is a problem and saying they're working on it, but also from the local community and from patients. A number of former patients have been in touch with us since the documentary, sharing their stories and allegations. That number has grown and grown over the day. And a final point, a 21-year-old man has appeared at Dundee Sheriff Court in private, charged with a sexual assault at Carsview.
Thank you very much, Fiona. And you can see Fiona's documentary about Carsview. It's called Breaking Point and it's on the BBC iPlayer. The First Minister says it's highly questionable whether the Prime Minister's Brexit plans will win the support of MPs. Nicola Sturgeon's comments follow the resignation of the UK Brexit and Foreign Secretaries yesterday. The leader of the Scottish Conservatives, Ruth Davidson, says Theresa May is doing the country's will and that those who don't back her should quit. Our political correspondent Nick Herdley reports from Westminster.
After resignations and a forced reshuffle, the new UK Cabinet met for the first time this morning. Key Brexiteer faces missing and questions over whether there could be more departures to come. The Prime Minister was at Westminster Abbey this afternoon, celebrating 100 years of the Royal Air Force. Its motto might have extra meaning for the PM today, through adversity to the stars. Adversity is something the Prime Minister has got to know well over the last few months. But the question now is whether she can get the support to allow her Brexit plan to take off, or whether the star power of some of her former cabinet colleagues is enough to bring her down. The First Minister says the SNP won't back the PM's Chequers plan, and she thinks it's highly questionable if it can get through Parliament at all. And her colleagues at Westminster agree.
Before we even get to a vote in the House of Commons, you're going to have to negotiate with the European Commission, and I cannot believe that the European Commission will look at this in any other way and say it's cherry picking.
The Scottish Tory leader has firmly backed the PM and is urging others to do the same.
I think the Prime Minister needs to have the UK government talking with one voice on this. I think this is a sensible compromise agreement. I would hope to see flexibility and movement from the EU 27. And if she comes back with a deal that looks very much like the compromise signed up at Chequers, then the big decision for the SNP is, do they back that sensible compromise, frictionless trade for goods, coming out of the CFP, or do they want to bring down the whole house of cards and have a no-deal Brexit?
There are deep Conservative divisions, but today some Scottish Tory Eurosceptics said they would back the PM.
If the EU decide to reject it, then we will have to push ahead with the no-deal planning for Brexit. But hopefully the EU will accept it and realise it is a good plan, because it works for business, it works for the economy, it works for jobs, and if it works for those things, we should support it.
The Scottish Labour leader thinks there could be a new general election with Jeremy Corbyn winning power, but Labour has divisions too. Do you want freedom of movement? Do you want there to be a single market for goods? What would you do on services?
Well, I think the Labour Party's been pretty clear in that we are in favour of a customs union arrangement with the European Union. We are in favour of a degree of freedom of movement of people, and as I've said, we think that in the context of the Scottish economy and Scottish society come to that, that freedom of movement is a good thing.
Theresa May's Brexit plan was never going to unite everybody. The question is, can it unite enough people to survive?
Well, let's get more on this. I'm joined by our political editor, Brian Taylor. But first, let's go back to Nick at Westminster. Nick, were all sorts of expectations yesterday. There was going to be a leadership battle. Is this the end of the political turmoil or just a pause?
It's the million-dollar question here in Westminster tonight, Jackie. The comments of people like Alistair Jack, who you heard in the report there, are important. Brexiteers who might not be happy with all of the deal but are prepared to live with it. Others have said that they might not be happy but they want to change the policy, not the person at the top. And yet, two more of these tonight, something the Prime Minister desperately wants to avoid. Further resignations, fairly low level, two vice chairs of the Conservative Party. But the danger for Theresa May now is that more of these are to come, that there'll be a steady trickle of resignations over the next few days. She has other things to worry about too, a certain presidential visit in a couple of days' time. Donald Trump was speaking about the political situation in the UK today, describing it as turmoil. Can the Prime Minister persuade him otherwise when she meets him on Thursday? Watch this space.
Well, thank you very much, Nick. Well, let's turn to Brian now. Brian, the situation here seems to be conflict over the substance of the deal.
It's very much conflict over the substance. I mean, let's bear in mind that while we talk about this as almost a political pantomime, a game, this is real anxiety among real people about their jobs and the economy and the future of Scotland and the UK. And in that context, they are concerned as to what the Brexit deal will ultimately be. Now, you heard Ruth Davidson there. She is trying to paint the SNP into a corner, saying that in practice it will be either the deal that emerges from Chequers or no deal at all. Of course, the SNP say that is an entirely bogus dichotomy. They don't accept that. They say that it is there will be no Commons majority for that, even if it emerges from the European Union negotiations. They say that a Commons majority could be assembled, perhaps, for the idea of maintaining membership of the single market and membership of the customs union. Now, as ever in Scotland, these arguments, this genuine battle over the future of Scotland and the future of the UK is also a proxy for a battle over independence, who represents Scotland's interests best and through which avenue.
Brian Taylor, thank you. Dangerous sections of the Glasgow School of Art are being dismantled after it was ravaged by fire earlier this month. Glasgow City Council has said surveys reveal substantial movement in the Macintosh building's walls and that a sudden collapse of parts was likely. Engineers say the dismantling of the unsafe sections will take more than 8 weeks. Women who say their lives have been devastated by mesh implants say the Scottish Government is adding insult to injury by claiming ministers here led the way in halting operations. It comes after the NHS in England announced an immediate curb on mesh surgery following an independent review. Amanda Mazzullo reports.
A promising career in the army ruined by a controversial procedure carried out a year after a moratorium was announced in Scotland.
I honestly don't know where I'm going at the minute. I mean, I'm slowly building myself back up. When I lost my job in March just there, that completely ripped me apart.
I have asked the Acting Chief Medical Officer this week to write to all health boards to request them to immediately suspend these procedures.
It was back in 2014 when Alex Neil made the announcement these procedures should be halted, following a campaign by survivors. Despite that recommendation being issued in Scotland, some health boards have continued to offer the procedure, they say in special circumstances. Campaigners say hundreds of women here in Glasgow and across the country have since received the implants without being adequately warned of the dangers. Now the Health Service in England has been told to stop using mesh immediately except as a last resort. Ministers here say they led the way. Not so, say lawyers representing those affected.
Survivors' reaction to what the Scottish Government has released in response to the position in England has been very upsetting. They found it difficult to comprehend that many of them have gone through operations after the moratorium was in place, that there was no reviews, no checks, nobody looked at what the actual NHS authorities were doing.
The Scottish Government insists progress has been made, that lessons have been learned.
It's been the bravery of the women coming forward that have enabled us to really change practice completely in Scotland. We're doing 5% of the procedures that we were doing. Those are for the right reasons in the right women, and we know that our women are appreciative of that. Safety has been taken into account.
That's cold comfort to Michelle, who says a full and active life has been destroyed. Her only hope now that no other women suffer as she has. Amanda Mazzullo, reporting Scotland.
The sister of a scientist murdered in Aberdeen 40 years ago has appealed for help in finally bringing her killer to justice. Dr. Brenda Page worked at Aberdeen University in genetics. She was also an escort. Her body was found in her flat in Allen Street in the city. Police began re-examining the case 3 years ago and have issued a fresh call for witnesses.
We'll look at everything, we'll explore every avenue and potential person who may have wanted to do Brenda harm, and I hope with final witnesses coming forward that we'll be able to piece together exactly what's happened to Brenda in the final moments.
A man has been arrested in connection with the death of a woman in Glasgow more than a decade ago. Tracy Wiles' body was found at her flat in the city's Barmulloch area in November 1997. Police said at the time she was involved in prostitution. The arrest of the 43-year-old man comes in addition to the arrest of a 37-year-old man in Mumbai in 2015. 2 men and a woman have been arrested after a man died following an incident in Glasgow yesterday evening. Emergency services were called to Reedvale Street at about 5 o'clock. 2 men were taken to hospital and 1 later died from his injuries. Air travellers face disruption after the announcement of planned strike action at Aberdeen Airport. The Unite Union says members have voted for industrial action after rejecting a pay offer. A series of 24-hour stoppages are planned for the 20th of July and the 2nd and 16th of August. A spokesperson for the airport says its offer is fair and reasonable, adding management are committed to continued discussions. Now, it's 12 minutes to 6. A reminder now of tonight's main story. Following a BBC investigation, some allegations over patient abuse and of drug use at a mental health facility in Dundee will be taken to police by NHS Tayside. And still to come, the ambulance driver who's competing in the World Hang Gliding Championships. Well, as we heard earlier, preparations are underway for the arrival of President Trump and the First Lady in Scotland later this week as part of their first official visit to the UK. The President was met by a small demonstration when he was last here 2 years ago as the Republican presidential candidate. Well, today, the Justice Secretary called for any protests to be safe and peaceful. Glenn Campbell looks at what kind of reception the President can expect.
In the golf town of Gullin, East Lothian, host to this year's Scottish Open, they know how to make visitors welcome. But not everyone here is convinced Donald Trump should be as well received on his UK trip.
I'm not his #1 fan, maybe that's fair to say.
Will you be protesting?
I won't be protesting, but I can very much understand it.
Oh, I think we'll get a hot reception, and I think probably should, but I don't know, as President of the United States, probably should get some form of welcome when he comes here.
We shouldn't lower ourselves by protesting about what he does in his own country and across the world.
There have been anti-Trump protests in Scotland before, but those planned this week are likely to be larger and noisier.
I think there'll be a great many people both in Glasgow and in Edinburgh at the main demonstrations. But if Donald Trump decides to spend part of his weekend, as it seems he's likely to, at one of his golf courses, I think you might well see some interesting, creative, direct action there as well.
Donald Trump teed off lots of people in Scotland even before he became president. He clashed with farmer Michael Forbes and other neighbours while developing his Aberdeenshire golf resort. He clashed with environmentalists over this offshore wind farm, which he tried and failed to persuade the courts to block. He also clashed with 3 successive First Ministers and all other Holyrood party leaders at the time of his election.
Once upon 10 years ago, a beast from the West came to Scotland.
In the United States, TV satirists celebrate Scottish resistance to Donald Trump and are eager for more.
I've met quite a few people who've taken on Trump in Scotland, and they're so inspiring. I think there's a level of distance. He's not our president, so you can be a little bit more irreverent.
So how do you think this visit will go?
He'll have obviously a nice reception from the Prime Minister and Queen, but I think the public are gearing up to make him feel really, really unwelcome.
Nice to see you all. Nice to see you.
As the owner of 2 widely acclaimed Scottish golf resorts, Donald Trump is a major investor. His mother was born here. Some believe it's in our best interests to show him more respect.
I don't agree with the protesters, but they have the right to do so. Trump will bring a lot of publicity to his 2 golf courses in Scotland, which will be to the advantage of golf in Scotland, which is an important tourist project.
If Donald Trump fancies a round of golf with a professional, well, many of them are here at the Scottish Open while he's in the UK. And this is a tournament he'd love to secure for one of his 2 Scottish courses in future. But that could be a difficult deal to seal while he's such a controversial figure on the world stage.
He is obviously a polarising figure, and there is such a wealth of courses that they can go to in Scotland that I think it probably just makes sense not to court the controversy that undoubtedly would come with taking any big event to one of Trump's courses.
In his mother's homeland, not everyone buys Donald Trump's hard sell.
Remember, Trump's a nice guy.
Glenn Campbell, reporting Scotland.
Those responsible for monitoring standards in Scotland's prisons want to increase the number of volunteers making weekly spot checks. It's almost exactly 3 years since independent prison monitors were introduced to ensure prisoners' rights were upheld. Stephen Godden can tell us more.
Freedom isn't something you associate with prison. But once inside the gates, independent monitors Kathy and Rebecca are given keys, a personal alarm and unrestricted access to check everything is as it should be.
Initially it's quite daunting. It's a massive place and there's no signs that tell you which way to go.
I had no idea just how complex the prison environment was until I started doing this role. But I've also realised how powerless individuals in prison can feel.
This prison has roughly 900 inmates. IPMs deal with concerns they have raised, ranging from the trivial to the serious. Today, they're meeting a prisoner who says she's struggling with her medication.
So we got her to sign a consent form, which means that we can now go to health, the NHS within the prison, and discuss her case with them.
Fairly typical, Cathy, in your experience?
Yeah, we get quite a few cases like this, and sometimes it makes a huge difference to the prisoner if somebody like an IPM can go back to them and explain the decision in more kind of friendly language as well.
Overseen by the prison's inspectorate, IPMs replaced the century-old system of visiting committees in 2015.
I mean, the old VCs, the visiting committees, were very good, laudable people who are trying to do a good job, but the organisation that's behind the IPMs now makes it far more credible and far more successful in delivering an appropriate service.
While agreeing it's a better way to monitor treatment and conditions, those looking from a prisoner's perspective say more work is needed to raise awareness and build trust.
Overcoming the distrust, I suppose you could call it, of many people in prison of the system. It's going to take a long time to realise that the IPMs are people who are there on behalf of the prison population.
Okay, thank you very much, ladies.
An academic and a housing officer, Cathy and Rebecca are among 120 volunteer IPMs. The challenge for those in charge is to recruit more like them. Continued success, they say, depends on it. Stephen Godden reporting Scotland, Edinburgh.
So football now, and Celtic are currently playing in a Champions League first round qualifier. They're in Armenia taking on Alash Kurt, and at half-time Celtic are leading 1-0 thanks to a goal from Ozon Edouard. The second leg takes place in Glasgow a week tomorrow. Now imagine gliding gently above the Scottish countryside. Well, on terra firma, Mike Armstrong is often in a bit of a hurry as he's an ambulance driver. But today he's in Macedonia competing in the World Hang Gliding Championships. Ian Hamilton went to meet him on one of his last practice sessions before he set off.
When at work, Mike Armstrong is a driver with the Scottish Ambulance Service. But on his days off, he drives to the top of the highest hill and leaps off. Because Mike is a Class 5 British hang gliding champion, and due to his success, he's been selected for Team GB to compete at the World Championships, being held in Macedonia.
As a wee boy, I just wanted to fly, dreamt of flying, and hang gliding was the opportunity when I was in my early to mid-20s.
So tell me, how does this glider differ from the other ones?
This is a Class 5, but hang glider pilots know them as rigid wings. And the difference is, as you can tell, it's quite rigid. It doesn't flex, but it's got control surfaces on the top in the form of spoilers that are operated by these wires.
To compete at the highest level, a good understanding of every flying condition is essential.
This is the Border Hills, and there's plenty of hills around here. Tinto Hill in the distance, which is our main flying site. This hill in particular is such a good site. I've flown to the coast from here over at Berwick-on-Tweed several times.
Mike is modest about his own prospects, but is confident about Team GB.
I'd like to think Britain will win. I don't expect that I'll come back as world champion, but I'd like to put in a good performance. You feel like a bird, particularly flying a hang glider. The position you're flying in, you're on your front with your hands out in front of you, and it just feels like you're a bird. And you fly with the birds, which is fantastic.
Now, is it all change on the weather front, Kirsten?
Not as much sunshine as we've had, Jackie. Thank you very much. Good evening to you. Yes, today has been a rather cloudy day across much of the country. And in the northwest, we have had some rain, which I suspect has been most welcome after such a long, dry spell. Into this evening and tonight, we'll continue to see some outbreaks of rain across the Western Isles, Skye, the North and West Highlands. This will gradually push into Orkney and indeed Argyll during the early hours. Some clear spells holding on across across the borders and later in Shetland, and another mild night in store with temperatures no lower than around 9 or 10 Celsius with light and variable winds across the board. Into tomorrow then, and we dawn on a fairly cloudy note. That rain in the northwest initially, and that will track its way somewhat more eastwards during the course of the day, albeit becoming lighter and patchier as it does so. I think one of the best places to see sunshine tomorrow will be across Shetland. Rather cloudier elsewhere, some rain through Caithness, perhaps the Inverness area and into central parts during the afternoon. Some brightness and sunshine holding on across the borders, although equally 1 or 2 showers perhaps here. And whilst we will have a good deal of dry weather across much of the west coast and towards the Isles, there will be a fair amount of cloud still. 15 to 18 Celsius in the north tomorrow, around 21 or 22 degrees in the south. Into tomorrow evening, and that rain continues to track its way eastwards, again very light and patchy in nature. Looking ahead to Thursday, that will again bring us a good deal of cloud with perhaps some very light and patchy rain at times. The very best of the sunshine will be across the Western Isles and along the west coast, and temperatures will be up a notch really for most of us on Thursday, around 18 to 22 Celsius. And then looking ahead to Friday, that will bring us a day of sunshine and perhaps some heavy thundery showers. Again, temperatures peaking around 22 Celsius. That's the forecast. Jackie.
I suppose it had to end sometime. Thank you, Kirsten. And that's Reporting Scotland. We'll have our late bulletin as normal at 10:30. But now we can go over to Fiona Bruce for the 6 o'clock news. Goodbye.